let us start off by just reminding ourselves what's going on right now. Are we in the game apocalypse? I've heard this comment suggested multiple times historically. I do think this is the most difficult time I have seen in my career. I think there's a few of us who would agree on that. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. That's the way of things. But again, I think what's really important here is that we look at what's happening and why. So we've got a variety of things like investment freezes. It's very difficult to get funding. We've got an increasing level of regulation, which is seemingly to be presented on us as the developer. I have issues with that approach. I think that a lot of the information we're being required to manage isn't something that we have access to. We did some work with the Information Commission Office, and I think it was fairly clear from the work I did there. The teams that have this information are the banks, the social platforms, and most importantly, I would argue, the game stores themselves. Because in general, unless we're running our own game store, we are not handling real player data most of the time. Well, yes, we're getting the gameplay and that kind of stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. Knowing someone's bank account details, their payment mechanisms, their purchase behavior is not something in general us as game developers do. But we are being held accountable for some of that aspects, and I find that nerve-wracking. And I think it's okay for us to admit that we find those things nerve-wracking. We will find solutions, I've no doubt, but it's important we recognise these are the pressures we're in. The cost of acquisition, obviously that's gone up. Whether you're PC or mobile or in VR, I think maybe in some ways VR is less so. With Apple producing their next device, and that is going to be another ski goggle I put next to the other ski goggles I used to get excited about. Look, I like VR. I enjoy it. I'm not sure that there are many companies who will be successful. There are some people like XR Games, people like Endreams are going to do great stuff there. But for the rest of us who are still in the PC, mobile, console space, acquisition still remains an issue. There has been arguably falling engagement. That's questionable. It's not necessarily proven, but we had a massive peak during COVID of people engaging with games, so much so we blew all records, and it's come down since then. Well, of course it has. People have gone back to their daily lives. People have gone back to normality, whatever that might be. I'm not sure I even knew what normal was. And now gaming is just it's still part of that equation, but how much of it is there? However, I'd like to posit that we've also seen a lot of bad behaviour, bad actors, bad loot crates. I don't think loot crates are essentially bad in themselves. I do think there have been bad uses of them, bad uses of ads, bad placement, bad UX, almost Ponzi scheme-like behaviour in some areas like blockchain, potentially, you could argue. I'm not saying all things are bad, but we have seen a bunch of bad things, and I think the net effect of that is we've seen a loss in trust amongst the consumers of games. So players, I think, have lost some trust with us. And if you look at some of the behaviour that seems to have happened in the industry generally, there's been a lot of people called out in various forms over the last few years. Large mergers and all that kind of stuff doesn't help our consumer confidence in us. There's a lot of things going on. There's also a question about whether we have too many games and the relationship between the number of games released versus App Store discovery. With 14,000 games released on Steam last year, that's a huge amount. Dwarfed into insignificance compared to the number of games released on mobile, but the routes to access games has gone down, and we know that an awful lot of amazing games just haven't been found. Add that to the environment of the global uncertainty, the cost of living crisis. If in the UK, obviously Brexit has had its impact, and not just in the obvious ways. Primarily, I think the access to skilled people has been potentially problematic. So I think that's something that's worth considering as well. On top of that, changes to business models like runtime fees, platforms merging with others. So, for example, Chili Connect, PlayFab and GameSparks all being absorbed by bigger companies, and then announcing that they would not be backwards compatible. That has a massive impact on who? The day-to-day game developer. And if you add to that maturing markets, we have a lot going on right now. It's not a surprise it's tough. It's not a surprise that we've seen so many redundancies in various games companies. It's not a surprise we see so many smaller studios struggling. So we have difficult times. Let's own that. Let's accept that. But let's see what we can do about it. I think this is a time that is a really good opportunity for us to stop and think. I think it's okay to stop and think, and we should do this regularly anyway. It is a tough time. We get that. I don't want to labour the point. Instead, I want us to think of it as a chance to stop, think, and decide what we're going to do about it. Because the one thing that is really important to remember is hope is not a strategy. No matter how much we would like to think that we have the power of being able to say we will be successful, that is not going to make us successful. What will make us successful is planning and making choices, smart choices. Key to making those smart choices is understanding the difference between a vision and a mission statement. So what's a mission? What's a vision? A vision is about knowing the direction your business is going in. We're not trying to define our strategy in terms of destinations. It's not like we're going to be number one and blah, blah, blah for this period of time and then that's it. It's not like it's over when we hit our goals. If we're running a business, we're running an experience, if we're managing a team, we want to know where we're going with that team. Now, don't get me wrong. It's okay to have a project. It's okay to have a specific game. It's okay to have goals and even game design pillars if you really have to. I'm not a fan of the pillar concept. I like visions more. I like vectors more. But if that's what floats your boat, fine, no problem. Whatever makes it easy for you to understand what it is. But if you can apply it as a destination, as a direction, not a destination, if you can apply it as a way of navigating, then your vision, your decision-making process can be actually very effective. And it comes by sitting down and asking yourself an important question. Why are you doing this? Honestly, why are you doing this? I've just told you all the bad things. I've just told you all the obstacles. I've just told you all the frustrations we have. And you're still making games. I joke quite regularly that the second worst thing in the world is making games. The worst thing in the world is not making games. But then I'm obsessed with making games. But why are you doing it? And your business strategy will be deeply affected by your personal motivation. And that's okay. In fact, that's actually important. The more there is a dissonance between your personal reasons for doing this and the business reasons for doing it, the more you're going to have difficulty, struggles, and you're going to burn out. So we do have to ask ourselves a question: why are we doing it? So let's give me some examples. Now, these are not real. These are just thrown up here because I'm working on a little kind of game show kind of YouTube thing I'm thinking about. I mean, it just made me think of ways of talking about it. So I want to make it a gameplay thing all around dilemma. I'm obsessed with the role of dilemma. I've decided that I want to have a professional accolade of BAFTA shortlist. I'm never going to get one. It doesn't matter that I'm never going to get one. What matters is that's what I'm setting out to do. And if you get the difference between that, it's the intention. It's what that means to my choices. What that means to the level of quality I want to imply in every action I take. And I'm also looking at the market opportunity. I want to look at ways of, expanding player lifetime. I want to look at ways of, what's the word? Looking at the crossover between RPG and video games. I think, what I mean by RPG game is a more tabletop in that context, by the way. I want to have 1 million monthly active users. I want to have an ARPDAU of 60 cents. That's set my money goals. And I want to make decisions meaningful. These are the things that are driving me. That's what success looks like to me. You're going to have your own version of that. Sometimes it's going to be about market penetration. Sometimes it's going to be a specific number or a monthly revenue or whatever else it might be. Sometimes it's going to be about communicating an idea that sets you out, something that's defining a genre can be part of what you do. The way that you innovate, all of these things might be things that matter to you. But that's what we're on about. Why are you doing this? What does success look like to you? This stuff matters. It really matters. And then let's look at what we're actually doing. Are we meeting this? So we put KPIs, key performance indicators, measurable qualities to these stats. And we decide how we're doing. Compared to where we want to be, where we are, where we're going. Does that curve look right? Is the rate of change of how we measure what we're doing looking like it's going in the right direction? We're not going to be there now, sure. But for the actions we're doing, are we getting in the right direction? Or are we stumbling? This is the point where we can start asking serious questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it. It's when we start thinking and taking a step back and realizing, again, what I said earlier, there might be a lot of things going bad in the world. There might be some things going good in the world. But it's important sometimes to stop and check yourself. And how do we do that? So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. So obviously we've got to mind the gap. We've got to understand where the gaps are. And a bit of gap analysis is incredibly key to any strategic approach. This is one of the first things we think about doing. We can take a lot of time thinking about how do we actually make sure that we create an experience that people care about. So I think that's vital. What does that mean? What does that look like? What's that practically? What we need to do is you need to understand where we are. We need to step back and we need to consider exactly what is our current position and the gap between our current position where we need to be. And we do that by considering specifically where are we in terms of the market, the audience, our team, and our proposition. And we need to make sure that those elements match together appropriately, that they do what we need them to do. And so obviously first thing we need to do is we need to look at the market. Now the trouble with the market data is that we are kind of stuck because the data we have available to us in the market is very limited. So for example, basically if you don't have large pockets, you can't use data like data.ai or Sensor Tower or there are various Game Refinery, things like that. These are tools out there, particularly for mobile, but not just that. There's also Steam Spy and various others, SteamDB. They're all deeply flawed because Apple, Steam, Google, etc. have all decided not to share data. So we don't actually know how other games perform accurately. We have to infer it. We have to make guesses. And a lot of these platforms that are very expensive, they do that by looking at ranking, whether it's downloads or revenue or free, and they try to work out what is the various performances of each game. And how do they do that? Well, they plug in other games into their platform. They know a subset of the games and they interpolate what they think the market looks like. And it's wrong. It's always wrong. It's okay to get a guess, but it is always wrong. In fact, one of the things I think is really important to understand when you're looking at data is market data is always incomplete. You have to understand what it is, and it goes back to the kind of blind philosophers myth around when they first encounter an elephant. I mean, it's not real, but look it up. Basically, if you're touching the tusk, it feels like you're touching a weapon. If you're touching the tail, it feels like a snake or a rope. If you're touching the body, it feels like a wall. If you don't have the big perspective, if you don't step back and look and pay attention to your limitations, you're gonna get it wrong. And that's okay, as long as you know what you can. Similarly, you need to make sure that you've set up data correctly in your game so you can actually understand what players are doing, the decisions they are making. If you haven't set up your data to allow you to understand the decisions they're making over time and to track that over time so you can see what day 1, day 3, day 7, day 14, day 28, whatever it is, day 60, 90, unless you understand what the retention levels are like, unless you can break it down into cohorts of those that spent, the top 25% that also happen to be retained more than 30 days, What's their first time user experience look like? How does that compare with people who churned on day one and didn't spend anything? Bingo. You now know something about what people who did it and went through successfully and paid, and why their experience was different from the people who went through and just churned immediately. Won't give you all the answers. You've got to remember the limitations of the data, but it'd be useful. But it will only allow you to compare players of your game in your game. Unless you have other comparisons from other games, that data set will always be limited. And you have to make judgment calls based on limited information. That is the job. But it's still massively, massively better than the times when we didn't have data. We just thought this would be cool. Well, cool for you, yeah, but what about the audience? So we need to pay attention to market data. We need to analyze market data. We need to look at other games. We need to look at what other games are doing, and we need to listen to other people. That's why it's good to come and network on shows like Pocket Gamer, webinars like this, or whatever else. Next, we need to know who the players are. I mean, it sounds obvious, doesn't it? Oh, they're the people who... Yeah, but we need to break them up. We need to understand them. We need to be able to make judgments based on specific behaviors that we expect from those players. I typically use 3 personas, and that means that I'm looking at the one for the mechanic of the game. So that's the start condition, challenge resolution, that kind of stuff. I tend to look at one for the what I call the context of the game. A lot of people call that the meta. No. Meta's bigger than that. For me, context is still in the game. The context is about the purpose and the progression of the player inside the game. So I think that's a really important area to look at. And I want to have a different target personality compared to the people I'm designing the core gameplay experience for. And then I have a third personality, which is allowing me to look at what I call the meta, and that is collaboration, social integration. But importantly, why would somebody watch your game on a stream? And that's an increasingly important part of any game design, because if we don't think about that in the game design, it won't come through in the marketing, it won't come through in the social experience, it won't come through in the kind of zeitgeist of games. So, and again, please let me know if for any reason my audio drops. So we start off with these things as hypotheses. We start off with these as concepts. But over time, we look at the data that we've got and we improve our hypothesis. This is not just a thought experiment. We need to know as much about these individuals as we can. Now, actually, I should rephrase that. I don't actually want to know who a person is. I'm not interested in tracking, what do I call it? Ahmed, who's my primary guy. I'm not interested in a specific person called Ahmed who's playing the game at a specific time. I'm looking at a construct of all of the people who behave in a particular way, and I happen to label that construct of average behaviors Ahmed, because that allows me to get a better sense of what that behavior, decision making, etc. might be like, because I'm looking at the averages of those behaviors, and I want people to be more like that character, that personality, that individual, and in order to be able to better find that person in the market and to satisfy their needs in the game. So this persona level approach can be really powerful. I mean, a lot of teams will define age, gender identity, cultural background. Even if you look at the notes, you'll see that there's an A, B, C1, C2, D sort of categorization. It's a really old school method of marketing categorization. It doesn't really work in the wide scheme of things anymore, but for our purposes as a persona, it's quite handy as shorthand. All this stuff is shorthand to help me get into my mind what decisions I need to make, and then we test that information. So let's say we've worked out who our players are. Next thing we need to know is, how do we want them to feel? Are we already satisfactorily making people feel the level of control that we want them to have? Or control is an interesting one because it's them feeling they have control, therefore they're escaping. And cozy games are a particularly good example where people just want to be able to escape. So they want to feel safe. They want to feel in control, and that is a motivational factor of a game design. So first-person shooters, it might be about competence. I don't play first-person shooters as much as I'd like to because I am old and slow, and when you come up against a 13, 14-year-old, it's headshot dead, I'm out, job done. Not fun playing a first-person shooter when you're in your 50s, even though that is my first love. If only somebody could find a way to make that work. I have several. Anyway, next up, other motivations. Social capital. The ability to show off. A lot of UGC-based experiences are all based on, look at what I did. But also, the fact of cosmetics and things like Facebook is an important part of, not Facebook, sorry, Fortnite. Can't think. If you're looking at Fortnite, the role of cosmetics in that, the social capital aspects of that, being seen to be there is actually a massively important factor in some games. But even completion, collection, all this kind of motivation, it's not like I'd spend 400 hours playing No Man's Sky. Oh, wait. Or Skyrim. Yeah, I am that guy. But if we don't understand not just who our players are, but what we want them to feel, we're not going to be successful at delivering the experience they need. And if we get to that stage, we need to understand that the loops we're creating for them do the job. So obviously you've got your start, condition, challenge, resolution, reward, the stuff that a basic game does. Well, how does that help the emotional journey of the player? How do you take them from like a relief state of mind to a tension state of mind? How do you take them from a anticipation to a fear of missing out? How do you make that emotional journey feel textured and engaging? It's not just about having a mechanic, it's about how you make people feel. And if you think about that, how, just because the mechanic works, if that mechanic doesn't work in harmony with a sense of purpose and progression, if there's no optimization, the context of the game isn't going to deliver. And if you go beyond that with the modern games, it's hard to escape the need that you want that like lifestyle fit. Does it feel right? Is it the first game I choose? The collaboration, whether it's in game or in online, the competition, all of these factors are massively important when you're doing an Animal Crossing or a Call of Duty. And at the end of the day, understanding what the rewards are for the players and how we can build a zeitgeist, a moment, a cultural moment that's focused on our game, they're the things that are going to really make the difference to our success. But we don't always get there. It's really hard to get there, which is why we have to stop, remind ourselves what the market's like, see what other people are doing, learn from it, understand who our audience is, apply what they want to feel to our proposition. And then, only then, can we be comfortable with making the right design choices. In fact, to be honest, a lot of the problems we have is we just didn't get the first time user experience right. But that's another subject. And again, when we're dealing with a difficult market position, we've got to understand what players value. Hopefully we've already understand what we want to make them feel. Now we've got to understand what we need to make them feel. I want it. The value proposition. Sometimes that's lots of people buying a single game, maybe a single game that we maintain and sustain and add to over a long period of time, a live ops type service experience. That's one way of going. Another way of going is the product. We have lots of different products. We want to sell lots of different products to the same person. Completely legitimate, doesn't matter which way you go. But either way, you need to understand what excites them. You need to sustain a relationship with them. And that relationship isn't just in the game itself, it's with you as a provider of games. So you have to think about whether you're doing a product or a service, how you engage with an audience, because it's so much easier to scale your game if you either have lots of people buying the same game which you maintain over time, or you have lots of things you can sell to the same player. And again, that sounds I'm being very commercial, but we're dealing with the difficult decisions. We're dealing with the how to adjust your game to survive. We don't survive if we don't have a commercial proposition. We don't have a profitable proposition if we don't understand what players value. Yeah, some fly-by-nights will come out and they'll do some kind of bad actor thing and they'll make some money, but then they go away. leaving players high and dry and unsatisfied and frustrated, sometimes causing them to not stop bothering buying games at all. I don't want to be involved in those kind of people. I want to focus on games that players love, they want to keep on playing, and the only way we do that is if we actually pay the time and attention to show them the love we've got for them. And then they will reciprocate by showing the love that they have for your game. I cannot stress the how deeply it affects me when I bump into someone who tells me how much PlayStation Home affected their early life. And I get this a lot. And this game is gone. It's so gone. 10 years ago. But I still get people telling me how much it impacted them, and that means a lot. That's probably more valuable than anything I got paid by Sony. But what is the form of exchange? And again, I'm going into more detail now. So we talked about what players want. Now, what are they willing to do for it? We need to think about exchange in multiple ways. It's not just a case of how much money will they hand over. Time is money. Grind is enjoyment in the game as much as it is contributing to the existence of the game. We have to understand the relative value. We still want cash at the end of the day, but that doesn't mean that we don't respect that playing and grinding in the game matters too. This applies again. This isn't just a live ops thing. This isn't just a free to play thing. This is about understanding the economy of play regardless. So paying up front for a game is perfectly legit. I know, I jokingly suggest that anyone still doing that is a zombie, but that's just me being, mean. The reality is that this stuff is really important to get right, whatever the game. Understanding what they care about gives you the breathing space to offer them something that matters to them. Is it a generator that lets them get more fuel because they've got some amazing car or whatever it is? Is there some power up that they can get? Is that something that you make available because they've unlocked level, or is it something that they can buy as an upgrade to the game as a whole? Is it DLC? Is it new playable spaces? What is it they really care about? And understanding exchange is not just cash. There is a role for ads, particularly in mobile, but even PC can still have real world ads in certain games, like racing games. Makes absolute sense. But you do have to be very careful. There's not a strong appetite for that. I don't think we're going to see a rewarded ad anytime soon, but I think at some point somebody will get the balance right. What I don't want to see is the bad behaviour that we've seen in mobile. I will mention one more thing on monetization exchange, and that is the role of premium. It's one of my biggest bugbears. People assume that premium is paid upfront games, when a paid upfront game may not be premium. Premium has a specific meaning. It means high quality and high price. It is intentionally priced high, but it supports that high price because it also has high quality in its deliverable. There are other strategies. Market penetration, so you have a high quality and low price. You can have economy, so it's a low price, low quality. A hyper casual game was a perfectly legitimate way to do things when there was enough revenue from ads, because it was an economy product. They could turn them out fast. I actually think we learned a lot about game development and design because of that, but obviously there are also some bad experiences in that space. And probably quite a lot of skimming, meaning low quality, high price. Anyway, I'm not going to take too much time on this one. Let's what I'm trying to get across is we think about the market, where we are, we think about the audience, we think about what the audience want and what our proposition is to that audience, and does it fit? Does it match what they want? Are we providing the best form of exchange for the expertise, effort, development time that we've produced that matches what the audience want? And I don't have a good answer about what's right. There is no right. What's right for this game? That's what matters. You then have to understand your team. So what does that mean? So your team is going to have a set of skills. You probably got a bunch of people together who you needed in order to be able to make the game in the first place. But over time, some of those needs change. Some of the requirements change. Do you make a different game because you have the people? How does that come into account when you think about the audience? So understanding your team and what motivates your team is incredibly important. We don't make games alone mostly. There are a couple of crazy individuals who seem to be able to do it. I have no idea how they manage it. But we do benefit whenever we have more people who have expertise to bring that we don't. Our overlapping experience matters. So getting the right people, I mean, we often talk about things like a games team needs a hipster, a hacker, and a hustler. I probably should find a way to convert that into D&D characters, but that's for another time. But the key thing is understanding the strengths and weaknesses within your team and how you can best leverage them. And sometimes where we encounter difficulties, we sometimes need to make difficult decisions about that. But we'll come to that. Essentially, though, what we're talking about is pulling together as much information as we can, understanding the gaps between what we need and what we've got, and what we do about it. We then make a hypothesis, test it, switch it up, adapt it. So basically, your key aim here is work out what's going on for your business as a game studio, what's going on for that game in terms of its audience, understand what the audience want is, the need that you're satisfying, and what you think is the gap that you can do better. Test it small as possible, as quickly as possible, because you don't want to make mistakes. But if you can make amazing strides just by making these fast decisions where you put a hypothesis out there, test it, and update it. That really matters. That's really the key thing. But I think we also have to remember one really difficult thing, which is that failure is always an option. My favorite Mythbusters quote, failure is going to happen sometimes, or regardless of the best plans. We've seen some amazingly weird things happening over the last few years in terms of data that shouldn't be doing what it does, but it does. Sometimes that's worked in our favor, sometimes it hasn't. But understanding that your plan may not go as expected is really important, and you need to own that. You need to accept that and pay attention to it. Don't ignore it. As you're going through the process, mental health matters. Now, that's not just for your team, that matters too, but for you as well. If you're running a team, you need to pay attention to your own mental health. You need to pay attention to your burnout, and you will be at risk at burnout. In times like this, it's very trying. There's lots of pressure. There's lots of stress. It's very easy to burn out. The best of us do. But you need to take some time. And part of the process of stopping, thinking, researching, and planning is to give you a sense of direction. It's to allow you to separate yourself from what your feeling is that you're trying to get through the day, and allow you to take a breath, take a step back, and to think about what you want. Do you remember I said before? Why are you doing this? Go back to why you're doing it, put numbers to it, KPIs to it, and things will be easier to then make clearer decisions, because it's not about how you feel, it's about what is going to get you to what you need to achieve. A difficult one you've got to ask yourself, though, is what is your appetite for risk? When you start out, the world's your oyster. It's so exciting. The world is there. We can do things. We can change the games industry. It's going to be amazing. But as you go through the process, grit, your resilience, comes down to you truly understanding your appetite for risk and your decision about what to do next. You're going to have times that you'll struggle, absolutely. But you need to understand and contain the risks that you face. But it's not just about you. What about your business partners? What about your team? How do you ensure that you understand their appetite for risk too? So it's incredibly important you understand that and pay attention to it, because at the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to be able to take our teams with us. It's a tricky one because when you're talking about engaging with your team, when you're talking about leadership, you need to make sure you've got the skills you need to be able to get through to the next step. But if they've got different appetites of risk, you've got to be able to understand how to manage that. One of the factors of leadership is that you're on a common endeavour, a shared project. You are adventurers, whether it's a junior member of staff or a COO business partner. You are working together on something which is a common project. If you're not pushing in the same direction, you will not succeed. You've got to be clear. You've got to communicate effectively. You've got to be open and honest. But there's an important distinction here. You don't have to. In fact, you shouldn't be telling everybody everything all at once. You have to understand the difference between understanding the truth, which you have to share, and you have to be authentic. It's really important you're truthful and authentic. But also, what is your job? If you're the leader, it's not about you sharing your woes and griefs and worries. You've got to get a handle on that, and you've got to work out what you're doing about that. You don't want to cast a shadow that leads to confusion and uncertainty when you're simply working out where you are. So it's incredibly important that you're clear. It's incredibly important that you share authentic information, but there is no point in worrying about anything until it's real. So what you need to do is understand where you are, get to grips with it as soon as possible, and understand how you plan ahead so that you don't leave your team in the lurch, but at the same time, you don't give them information that leads them to be frightful or uncertain. They need to understand that you've got your plan ahead and you've got your mission and you are managing that process. New things will come up. Things will knock you off your way. But that's your job. Your job is to understand what the implications are, come up with a solution, make sure it's the right one, then communicate to the team and engage with them to work out the best way to take your path forward. It is a team work, but at the end of the day, you also are responsible for that team as a leader. One of the things that's always important when you're doing this is to simplify. There's two aspects to this. When I was saying about you don't share everything all at once, it's not because I'm trying to hide anything, but often there will be misinformation coming from you failing to simplify. There's no point in making complex messages. This is one thing I'm very bad at. I say too many things too much of the time. And actually what's important is where we are, where we go. That's it. But also in design, in our proposition, in our marketing, we need to be simplifying. What is going to get us to the point where we find that audience? What is going to be the point that's going to convert that audience to spending? What is that action that's going to make people feel more engaged in the game? Simplification is massively important. As one French designer once said, a design is not done when I've run out of things to add, a design is done when I've run out of things to take away. Somebody will tell me who that was. So simplification, massively important. But also repurposing. Look at what you've got. Look at what material you've got. How could you reapply it in a way that's fresh, exciting, delightful, and also which allows you to address additional markets, wider markets, more scale. Repurposing is the king of the pivot. Being able to understand how you can repurpose what you're doing anyway, so that you can maximize the output. That can be incredibly powerful. We see this a lot in video. We've seen YouTubers do YouTube shows and then cut those key moments into shorts or TikToks, or do Patreons where they do much longer detailed versions. They're like uncut versions of that footage. Understanding the different purposes of each segment and how we can produce one thing and then reuse it multiple times, that is going to make a huge difference to your sustainability. But then there's difficult decisions. And sometimes you have to cut a feature that you love. Sometimes you have to say goodbye to some team members. It's not a reflection of their ability. It's not a reflection of, you know, what you want to happen, but sometimes you have no choice. And it's better to make that choice fast, cleanly, and simply than it is to linger and make everybody suffer in the process. I've seen dithering particularly when I was in telcos, over decisions that's left people feeling anxious, concerned, and essentially damaging their mental health for a decision that, you know, I'm basically talking about me being made redundant myself. I've been there myself. I've been made redundant, and going through that process is painful when people are dithering. Yes, it's painful regardless, but it's much less painful in the long run if I can get on and do something about it. So this is a tricky one. It's not just about redundancy, obviously. It's about making sure that you get people clarity and make the difficult decisions, because it makes it better for everybody in the long run. Don't dither, do. But, as I said before, your job as a leader is to understand the problems you're facing and get clarity about what you need to do before you lay the burden on people whose job it isn't. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we're really trying to say is, what can you actually do now? You look at your path, you look at what's going on, you look at the data, you look at your position in the market, you look at your team, you see what you can do as a team, what can you actually do now, and then that allows you to decide what pivot you do, what path change you need to make. And sometimes there'll be a variety of choices available to you. You make a decision what you think is going to be the one where that path can take you somewhere new or somewhere strong. And by the way, how do we know what that is? Because remember, we went back to the beginning where we said we're going to work out why we're doing this. We're going to put a number to why we're doing this, and we're going to use that number to allow us to make a vision, which is a direction. Which of these paths are going to get us closest or most likely to hitting those target KPIs? That's how we make decisions. That's how we pivot. Take the emotion out, because we want to do all the things all of the time. I know I do. Take the emotion out, work out what the best decision is that's going to meet what we set out to do in the first place. And you're going to make stronger decisions as a result. But always, always have a backup plan. What happens where things go wrong? What happens when things don't work out? What is your backup plan? What are the alternatives? There is always an alternative. You just need to be able to think about it and prepare for it and understand what you're going to do about it. And ideally, when you think about your plans, make sure that you're allowing as much flexibility as possible. You know, what are the roles that each of your team members can cover? What are the bases that they can cover? How do you make sure that that allows you to be in the best possible position to adapt if a particular choice doesn't work? You know, you need to think about it. And there's some techniques we can do to help that as well. Postmortems, amazingly important things. You do a thing, you review it. What happened? What went right? What went wrong? Why? Great. But I also love pre-mortems. What's a pre-mortem? Pre-mortem is we basically have a session exactly like a post-mortem before we've done the thing. And we say, this failed because, and you invent a reason why it failed. And then you step back from that assumption of failure, what could have caused it. And that process is incredible because it changes the way you think. Whenever we do planning, we often think, okay, if we do this, then that will happen. If we do that, then this will happen. Great. But we don't spend enough time saying, if this went wrong, it would have been because we didn't do this. If this went wrong, because we didn't do that. Pre-mortems are just as important as post-mortems. It allows us to set up and understand the proposition of what we're trying to do and act upon it. And doing that in advance gets us ready. It tests us. It pre-warns us of what could go wrong. So if it does go wrong, we're all ready for that. We're already primed. We can do something about it. And therefore, we're less likely to struggle in the process, and we're more likely to succeed. Not certain, but more likely. Another thing I recommend to anyone who's going through this process, if you're running a team or whatever, is get help from your peers. Find other people you respect and trust, people who will tell you you're being an idiot or that you're not being an idiot, and whose opinions you really value. We're lucky that we have people like Nick Button Brown. We have people like Phil Mansell from Jagex, the Oliver twins, so Andrew and Philip Oliver. They're friends of ours. They are happy to have us talk to them about where we're going and what we're doing, and they give us honest feedback. It doesn't mean that they've got all the answers. They don't have to. They're a sounding board. They allow us to work out that we're not being idiots, that we have thought this through, that we are competent. Because everyone will have moments where you don't feel competent. You need that sounding board. You need that sense of engagement. You need somebody else. It is dangerous to go alone. Get advice. Get support. Even if it's just somebody to cry on the shoulder of when you're feeling stressed, and that's okay. You're going to feel stressed sometimes. This is the problem with being an entrepreneur. It's a very stressful process. That's okay. But knowing that you can do that safely without casting a shadow on the people around you is incredibly important. And once you've had that moment to reflect, well, I'm not saying necessarily cry, but when you've had that moment to reflect, it's going to be much easier to be authentic with the rest of your team because you've had the chance to digest the problem and resolve what you're going to do about it. And that's what people want from you. A clear, precise understanding of the direction you're going in. They want you to show the vision. And that's what we're trying to do here. How do we do that? Again, remember, hypothesis, test, adapt. We don't have to get everything right at once. We can check with the things we're doing, whether it's an A/B test, whether it's something else, we can check and we can adjust and we can plan. That is incredibly powerful. Another little thing I'll chuck at you though. Don't make decisions based on one thing. So one decision needs two benefits. So if you're going to take something for money, you can do some work for hire, okay, but what else are you getting? Are you learning a new thing that you can reuse? Are you getting established in a way that allows you to be in a position where not just that potential client, but several other related potential clients can look at you and take you seriously? Is it a portfolio piece? Is it something you can then reuse? Is the code something you need to develop anyway, and you've set up the agreement so that you're doing it for that particular client, but you keep the source so you can use it for a specific project? Now, obviously, the various contracts that you do, the various agreements you have don't always allow those things, but you need to go in with your eyes open and say, I'm doing this because it's the cash, or it's because it's the learning, or because it's the portfolio, or because it's the whatever else it is for you. If you go in and do just the cash and there's an issue, you've just wasted your time. If you go in as an issue and you're doing more than one thing, you've gained more than one thing. So again, really important. When you're looking at your strategic choices, don't just go for the quick, easy win. Think about the consequence. Think about the long-term impact, not just the quick buck. Again, as I say, vision is a direction, not a destination. It's about using the data points, the KPIs, as ways of using decision-making that's based on data, not just emotion, but it's always targeted to get you closer and closer to where you're heading. Because at the end of the day, you've decided why you're doing this. You've worked out what the data is. And I know I'm repeating myself, but it's really important that we remember why we are doing this in the first place. Because it's so easy to lose sight of that. And finally, remember that failure is always an option. Thank you very much. I hope that was useful. I hope you've got a kind of sense of what we're trying to communicate in this. Can you still hear me? I hope you can. I can't see any comments yet, so I'm not sure if you can or not. I mean, type away. Yay, thanks, Rob. You had me worried there for a second. So does anyone have any questions, thoughts, worries, concerns? Was that useful? I can see Rob typing away there. one thing I'll chuck in while Rob's typing. One particular method you might want to investigate is a thing called HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points. It's a method designed by the food industry to make sure that they could feed the Apollo astronaut safely. Because if you think about it, if I've got a food package, the only way I know it's safe is when Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin open the package up. I can't actually test it before that because that breaks the seal. So I have to think about everything in the process to get that packaged food on the rocket before it gets on the rocket, and know all of the critical points in that process where things could go wrong, work out what good looks like, and make sure I've got that in my system. Now, that's fine, you work that through, but the important thing is that's why pre-mortems and post-mortems are so important, because I've got to constantly be checking these steps and make sure that they are still the correct variables, that good is still the correct outcome, that we understand that we've got the right critical control points, and constantly be improving that process. So Rob's saying it's useful. Thank you very much. Great. You got a call, so no worries. And Rob, you know where I am. If I can do anything, obviously, please help. Let me know. We'll get the recording out and share it with everybody, and I'll also share the slides too. You've read that a lot, but you need to go. No worries, Giddo. And like I say, if anyone has any questions later, we'll be doing an AMA on Friday between 1 and 3. So I'll be right here on Discord, ready to answer any questions. So obviously, if you come up with questions later, feel free. Anyone else got any questions for me, or are we all done? I can't see any typing, but obviously feel free to type away if you want to. If not, I am going to say thank you very much for listening. Hope that was useful. As I say, we'll get the slides and the recording out, and hopefully we can talk more. If, of course, you guys decided or you need some more help, I'm not sure if you're aware that we have now decided to open up our consultancy services to people we're not just publishing. So if you're looking for support to get your startup working, or to fix and rescue that project, we're actually offering services to support that process as well, and even offering training and even contract-based publishing. So publishing where we're not just the publisher of record. So if any of that is interesting, or you want to talk more about that, then feel free to reach out and we can tell you more. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much. Sorry about the audio problems we had earlier on in the session, and hopefully we can edit that out of the recording neatly. And I will say thank you very much, and we will speak again soon. And like I say, come and talk to me on Friday. Bye then.